Could I ask people on the panel just to come back in, please, if you could?
Okay, can I have a first go on that one then, since I'm already on?
That'd be great. Yeah, Chris, if you want.
I think it's a really excellent question, and it's something I thought about a lot, and I almost put in a slide on it, but I already had too many, as demonstrated. I think you've got two sorts of people in the world. Some who think that COVID is some sort of natural experiment which allows us to have exogenous variation in things which can be exploited to understand impacts, and you have the other sort, which I very much put myself in, and think that it creates an incredible amount of confusion and noise in the data set, which hugely complicates anything we're going to do. So personally, I feel a bit pessimistic about you really using the observational data over the recent period. I think we're just going to have this gap in time where we could be using these routine data sets.
Thanks, Chris. Does anybody else want to come in and talk about how they are coping with the COVID period? I say as if it's over, but Laura, are you trying to get in? Yeah, please.
Yeah, I've had conversations recently around resource utilization and the fact that, you know, people are generally going to hospital less, you know, consulting with healthcare professionals less, and whether or not you would be able to conclude something around potential cost savings of an intervention because of COVID. And we did, you know, contemplate, this is an issue for, you know, all health economic evaluations. This is not unique to that specific application, whether or not we sought from the likes of NIHR guidance on, you know, what is our reference point. So I think that's the key thing. Are we thinking about savings compared to the, you know, status quo kind of pre-COVID? Are we thinking about now we're in a situation whereby people perhaps, you know, consult with healthcare professionals less or do things more remotely? You know, what is our kind of reference point to have a clear steer from the likes of NIHR? We ended up, you know, not getting up the guts to kind of put that letter together, but we felt that it was a general issue for all kind of economic evaluation. What do we do with all this data we've collected for the last couple of years? How do we actually make any conclusions about whether or not things are cost effective? Yeah.
Just to add to that, Laura, the intervention itself is often different because it can't be delivered face to face or in a group. The interventions as they were originally intended aren't delivered in that way. So it becomes even more. It's not just cost effectiveness; it's effectiveness.
Thanks, Jerry. Does anybody else want to come in there? So shall I move on to the next? We collected up 2 or 3 questions. So does anybody else want to come in? Oh, Claire, yeah. Clara, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say the other thing is outcomes, and outcomes that have been collected within the process, you know, during the COVID period, and when people are answering questionnaires that ask them about their health or their well-being, and it's being impacted by the pandemic. So, like separating out what's the impact of pandemic and what's the impact of an intervention or condition. That is one of the things that has been an issue. And related is the issue of values or the tariff that you attach to outcome measures. So the tariff that we currently use for EQ5D is from the 90s. And there's a question about preferences and whether they've changed. So the re-evaluation for the UK, the second study, because there's already one that's been sort of not accepted, is due to happen from this year. And then there's a question of, is that like reflecting sort of pandemic issues, and how do you deal with that anyway? If it is, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, thanks, Clara. Yeah, we mustn't forget that there's, yes, the way in which we sort of value the benefits as well as how what benefits we measure will also change with the context, which I think was the point I think that Matt was making in a lot of his talk as well, about the context is very important. Okay, I'm going to move us on to one of the general questions, which was from Chris Albertin. And he said it was a sort of broader question for today. But how do we sort of adapt economic evaluation when you consider the interplay between NHS and social care services? And they might be council or private owned, so not standardised costings. And I suppose he was saying, as an ageing dementia researcher, this comes up a lot. So who wants to take the lead on this one for us about looking at social care as well as NHS services? You all have been warned, so you can't duck this one. Well, Chris, what we can say so far is this is a relatively new topic, and the economists are learning how to take account of social care. I think that's definitely going to be the case. But does anybody want to come in?
Well, Matt, I'm trying to think whether anything came up at the event that we held recently when we were talking about different evidence users.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think we were made very aware of the fact that we are dealing with a very different context here, and some of that, we are going to have to change our methods considerably. We can't just pick up a new set of unit costs and apply those. I can see Matt might want to come in. So Matt, do you want to, and then Laura? Yeah, please.
I've read the question over a couple of times now, and there's a lot of ways to do this, but I'm going to do it a couple of ways. Firstly, in terms of, because I've been doing some work with social care services, I'll be talking to local authorities. One aspect which we've got a problem with, particularly with social care services, and when we're interested in using routine data, is that social care data doesn't really have the necessary metadata to be able to tell us what actually is being collected in social care data. You're seeing a few databases in a regional sense rather than national sense trying to collect social care data, which we could then use to inform our analyses. But even those that are getting the data, when you talk to them, have said, we can't really come from a perspective of looking at the data and going, right, this is what you're collecting, this is what we're going to use. They quite often go, right, we're collecting all this, you're going to have to go through everything with the informatics specialist and talk through it. So it's a really complicated job. So a particular thing to do with, if we're going to start looking between the NHS and social care services, is this introduction of practices we've introduced within the NHS, which is developing metadata, having data dictionaries, having it properly laid out, and then having methods for accessing the data so we can actually start to use it in our practices. Because otherwise we're completely reliant on negotiations with health informatics specialists in local areas, which is time consuming and complicated, or primary data collection. And those that use social care services, if you're doing primary data collection, for example, if I put out a survey to older people, there's problems there with recall bias and cognitive burden and so on and so forth. So from a data perspective, at least, there needs to be further investment in metadata and data systems, social care. Otherwise, we don't really know what's there to use.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And one of the things we did here at this this sort of roundtable event we held a couple of weeks ago was that actually they do think the social care data is improving rapidly, particularly in response to COVID. That actually a lot of the data collection systems in social care have improved, and I think they were saying from April next year we should expect quite a big change in availability. But we shall see. We've all been here before. Laura, please. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think one of the main challenges in social care and evaluation is not having a clear objective function. There are multiple different outcomes of interest. It differs by, what population you're thinking about with regards to social care. So actually, the data and the evaluation side of stuff can't really progress until we know what it is we're trying to maximize, and I kind of struggle with that. And then beyond that, do we have a good way of kind of measuring those things and thinking about trade-offs? And I feel until we've kind of bottomed that out, we just keep going round and round in circles. But I don't know, maybe other people know what we're trying to maximize in social care. I don't know. Maybe I missed out.
Rachel, you wanted to come in next.
Well, I suppose, yeah, it was just reading the question back, and I suppose the question was, how is economic evaluation impacted when we consider the interplay between these services? And I suppose a key thing is that we widen our perspective. So when we're looking at kind of health interventions, we tend to be looking at the impact on the health service. And as Laura's indicated, I suppose we need to look at wider outcomes, because different funders are concerned about maximising different outcomes. And then we also need to widen the perspective about where the costs fall. And I think, yeah, we don't have an answer yet of how to combine that all into one metric to say, okay, here's your overall measure of costs, and here's your overall measure of benefits. So some people do things like cost consequences analysis, where you kind of list your outcomes on multiple measures. So we might have, well, here's the impact on health, here's the impact on well-being, which might be more important in social care, maybe here's the impact on something else. We kind of list the costs that fall on different budgets, but then we kind of stop and we don't really make a recommendation about the decision, and that's up to the decision maker. But yeah, I think there's a long way to go in this area, so I don't think anyone's going to have an easy answer for you.
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, I can see that Chris Todd has suggested that Martin Knapp's group's coming here, and I think we're all conscious of the fact that the amount of strain that's been put on Martin and his colleagues' expertise in social care. I think we're all going to have to become experts in social care. We can't always rely on Martin. But Matt, do you want to come in and make the last comment on this, and I'll move us on to the next?
It was really building on what Laura was saying. So we can reflect on at least 2 measures and a different framework. So SENS capability-based framework and capability-based measures like the ASCOT and the ICECAP, they don't fit into a maximand. So number one, they don't fit into a quality framework, and they don't fit into a maximand. There's the argument with the capability-based framework that what we're trying to achieve is sufficient capability. That is that we don't want to maximize people to do everything, but we have an idea that people should be able to achieve a sufficient level of quality of life. So the ability to feel love, the ability to feel enjoyment. And we don't want people to have all the love and all the enjoyment ever. We don't want to consume it completely, but they should have a sufficient level. And this is kind of been applied in social care and fits into a different framework. The probability with capability-based measures and the capability-based approaches is difficult to operationalize, and it doesn't fit into our nice maximizing qualities framework. It sits very different, but there's a lot of work going on there, and it's really interesting.
Thanks, Matt. One of the other comments we got was from Asan Akpan, who said he would love to do an economic evaluation of his input as a community geriatrician, and he asked for suggestions on who might he want to collaborate with, how would he make that possible, how would he find the sort of funding for the time of a health economist, or would anyone here actually particularly be interested? Jerry, I suspect you're going to pick up some of those issues in your talk, which sort of advises people on how to access resources. But does anybody just want to make any comment about economic evaluation of community geriatrician role? Has anyone done work or know of work that's similar that Asan might be able to access? It's a very nice kind of sort of mega question, if you like. It's not a specific intervention, but more of the value of an entire work or a new way of working, which I think is, again, is a nice thing for the economists to take on.
Yeah, I can just say quickly, Mark, I mean, there's been a fair bit of trial-based work, but a lot of it outside of the UK in terms of, well, interventions shaped around community geriatric, geriatrician involvement, but probably less so in a kind of UK service context, kind of linking back to I suppose, Rachel's talk, as I would have thought in terms of the relevance. So it probably is a bit of a gap. And again, there has been trial-based work in the UK quite recently, looking at things like hospital at home, discharge to assess, models for delivering what we call comprehensive geriatric assessment. So there's been a fair bit of trial-based work, but probably less I would have thought about what Asan's referring to. I can sort of picture what he's referring to. So I think it probably is a gap in the kind of UK service context, I think.
Thanks, Andy. Let me just finish up. So Jerry Richardson's going to give us the final talk, sort of advising on sort of signposting people to where to go. But one of the things which I did ask people to have a think about was kind of what they see as the most exciting opportunities, kind of doing economics in aging and frailty. So we sort of asked you to all to sort of think about how the work you do relates to aging and frailty, but there are things along the way that you've thought, oh, this is a really exciting opportunity for economists kind of to get involved in. So does anybody want to jump in on that? Yes, Matt, please.
I'll bring one thing in, given that Andy's on the call. The electronic frailty index and the ability to quantify frailty, and to have it when I'm doing stats, econometrics, I obviously need to quantify stuff. And I used to work in older people before, but the ability to now quantify frailty status, particularly in routine data like primary care data sets, opens up a whole range of possibilities. So I'll be using the Care 75 Plus cohort to start estimating utility values, to do with frailty, so that frailty can be better included in economic evaluation models. And that's just one option. But this kind of routine data analysis, which Chris is talking about using primary care data, now that we can quantify the EFI within this routine data, it means we can actually start doing this analysis using routine data. So that movement to the ability to quantify frailty is just a massive step. And I think you're going to see a lot more research now that we can do that. And I think you'll see people moving away from this paradigm focused on age to focused on frailty.
Andy, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's opportunities relating to everybody's talks. I mean, if I was going to probably pick something specific, actually, the area where it felt like there was the biggest gap was probably maybe around sort of equity considerations, I think, and how they relate to older people, because it's so complicated, but so important. So it felt like that is something that there's huge potential. But I think there is sort of across the board, as there often is in aging, frailty, dementia related research, there are often many gaps that are sort of ripe for new research, actually.
Does anybody else want to come in, or yes, Chris, please.
Well, just to build on Matt's point as well, I think that measurement really does give us a whole new set of areas to explore as well, and interesting questions. So, for example, should evaluations be targeted at reducing the how frailty develops over time, for example, should they be targeted to lessening the impact of given level of frailty? So I think there's really interesting questions. And I think it also allows us to start talking about heterogeneity a lot more as well. So I think a huge number of exciting possibilities there.
Thanks.